Guys, I'm going to see if we can't do some of my free upgrades on this engine. Let's see, I need a 10 millimeter to pull this casing off. Trying out this Hyper Tough impact driver that I picked up at Walmart. It was like 39 bucks. Seemed like a pretty good deal. And it seems like it's got some pretty good power. It's a lot quieter than me using my air impact. Definitely speeds things up. I like it already. Go ahead and pull this loose. There we go. Got the casing off. And go ahead and turn this motor just a little bit. If you look, this is your camshaft. You got a timing dot right there, and you're going to have another one right here on the crankshaft. So whenever you take these apart, put them back together, you rotate that around and you line up these two timing dots. Any way to pull the cam comes out real easy. It pops out, and then you've got your two lifters. That's the back one, that's the front one. There's the cam. Alright, then you want to rotate this around until you can get to the rod bolts. Now when you take this off, I normally like to mark it so that I make these two surfaces back up the same way, and it all goes back together the same way. Now while we got this apart, we're going to go ahead and pull the low oil sensor out of here too, and that'll give me just a little bit more oil capacity in this engine. Alright, well, we got our connecting rod bolts loosened up, so we'll go ahead and pull these out. And in case anybody's wondering, the torque specs on this engine, these connecting rod bolts should be at 9 pounds. The cylinder heads are like 17 pounds, and then your flywheel flange nut should be torqued down to 54 pounds. That's what the specs are on this engine. Come on out of there, there you go. And now we can pull that. Now if you look there, right there, you see the little tab, or that little tiny mark. See if I can get me a pointer here. Anyway, there's a little mark there and there, and you flip it over and you don't see the marks on this side. So these mark sides go to the outside. And now we're just going to rotate this and push the piston up out of the cylinder. Okay, my first upgrade that I do, and by the way, you've got matching marks there and there as well. You can remove these little casting plugs that are here. You can reach in there with a Dremel and buff them out. That'll give you a couple of grams lighter for the piston. And one of the first upgrades I do is, you see that hole right there. That hole gets oil down to the crankshaft, and that oils up this bearing. And I normally will drill that out a size bigger. It gets a little bit better lubrication on that bearing. And if you look down here, this is your oil rings, and I'll pull these out and I'll drill me some extra holes in there for oil, because if you look, you got a hole here, right down there, there's like a square hole, and then you've got one up here, and that's the only lubrication points to get oil around that oil ring there. So I'll drill some extra small holes around the edges so it'll get me more oil in that cylinder. So that's one of my other upgrades that I do, and they don't cost anything. Okay, we've got that one right there drilled out a size bigger, and I went up to a 3/16 on it, and now I'm just going to make sure that it is deburred, because that's the last thing you want is a burr on the inside. Now we're going to deburr the outside. Alright. Anyway, I said I went up to a 3/16 inch hole on that. Not a whole lot bigger, but it's going to be enough to get a little bit extra lubrication in there. And I'm going to get me some 3000 grit sandpaper and lightly buff this a couple of times. And then I'm going to buff this as well, just to make sure that I've got all the burrs and got it polished right. But that little bit right there is going to get you a little bit more lubrication on that rod, a little less friction. So whenever you go higher RPMs, it's going to be less stress on that connecting rod. I thought it was recording, but it wasn't. Anyway, I pulled the rings off the piston, and I went ahead and drilled my holes around here on the inside. They're the original top and bottom ones, and I put one here, 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 there, right there, and over here, so we can get more lubrication in that cylinder. And if you look, they've helped you out on this piston a little bit too, because you see the marks that I told you about that go outside when you put this back together. They've also given you a directional arrow to show you what side is down on that piston when you reinstall it. Anyway, I'm going to polish these a little bit, very gently. You don't want to take that much off of it. You just want to get it a little bit smoother than factory, and that's less abrasion on your crankshaft. And this is 3000 grit sandpaper, and I'm just very gently polishing it to make sure that they're smooth. Let's hit it with some brake clean. And you see looks a lot different than what it did just a moment ago. Clean that off. Okay, now we're ready to put this back together. When I put these back together, I always use assembly lube. You don't want to have these bearings and stuff like that, and these moving parts touching each other with no lubrication whatsoever in there, because you'll just undo what you just did. So we'll clean these up real good, and then we'll use the ring compressor to put this piston back in. We got it in the ring compressor. Now we're going to put a little bit of assembly lube on the bearing surface. And we're looking for those tabs. There we go. And when you do it, they should just push right in. You shouldn't have to force them in. Tighten this up just a little bit more. And I actually put some assembly lube on the inside of my ring compressor here, so that I'm already lubrication on that piston. Oops, sorry. Okay. Now I got the piston and rod back in. And we'll just spin that around. Again, make sure that notch is out. Arrow on the piston is pointing down. You don't want to put this thing back together backwards and have it blow up on you or come apart, or have to take it back apart after you realize that you messed up. And we're going to put us a little bit of assembly lube on the bearing housing down here. And put that cap back on. Oh man, I forgot to remove that low oil sensor. I reckon right now would be a good time to remove it, wouldn't it? I believe that is an 8mm. Yep. There we go. Find our 8mm up here. Don't have one. That okay. Go ahead and pull that out. And I'm just doing this to gain just a little bit more oil capacity in this engine. That's out. Now I could pull this out, or I could just run a screw in the end of it and plug it off that way too. It's just a little rubber piece that runs through this housing. And you could either unbolt it or run you just a short little self-tapping screw in the end of it. I'm going to go ahead and remove it so I don't have to fool with that again. There we go. This is what I'm talking about here, is for the low oil sensor. And that'll remove all that wiring that you got on the front of your engine, except for your kill wire. When you hook up this kill wire, all you'll have to do is hook up to this wire, run it through a toggle switch and back down, and hook the other end to the frame. Or you can hook it right here on the casing, you know, one of the casing bolts or one of your motor mount bolts. And when you ground this wire, you have no spark to the engine. So that's how you shut it off, is you just ground this wire out and it won't run. I looked around and I cannot find the right size bolt that I want to block that off. So I'm just going to use a self-tapping screw in the end of it just to plug it, and that'll work out okay. But if you're going to cap this off with a bolt, find a bolt that just barely fits in there and slide you an O-ring on the bolt, run it in there, and then put a nut on the other side of it with a washer and tighten it up. Make sure you use some Loctite on that so it doesn't come out and you wind up with a bolt in your engine. You don't want that. But that's blocked off. Alright, let's go ahead and put the bearing cap on and torque that down, or the rod bearing cap, yeah. I missed recording putting the piston in there with the ring compressor, so we're going to do that again. Should have recorded that. Anyway, I just tap it in there. You shouldn't have to force it. See how easy that went in there? If you coat the inside of your ring compressor with assembly lube, it should slide right in there, and you really don't have to horse that down, you know, real hard in order to compress those rings. to drop that in there. We're going to rotate our crank around. There we go. Now we can push it down to where we can get to it. And we're going to throw a little bit more assembly lube on here. And drop the cap on. Clean these off again. And we'll go ahead and drop our bolts in. Alright, hold on, let me go get my torque wrench. We've got our connecting rod installed and torqued down. Now we're going to flip the engine over on its side and reinstall the cam and the lifters. Make sure I don't have any trash on the lifters. A little bit of assembly lube. We're going to throw some on the top of that too. And we're going to drop the back one back in. Clean that off. Some assembly lube on that. Metal on metal parts with no lubrication is not a good idea. Alright, now we're going to rotate our crank. And there's the timing mark right there. We're going to take our cam, clean it off. And there's the timing mark on the camshaft right there. Throw some lube on that. Throw some on our cam lobes. Shoot. I hope I didn't block out everything with my shirt. Nope. You gotta clock these together just right. There you go. See the two timing marks are lined up right there now? Okay, this engine's now in time. And we're going to throw some of this on the cam gears. And I'm going to rotate it a little bit just to kind of distribute that around. Alright, now we can clean this gasket surface up a little bit. Since I ruined the gasket taking it apart, I've got to clean that up and throw me some silicone on there. That way we don't have any oil leaks, because we don't have a low oil shutdown on it anymore. So you want to make sure that you don't have no oil leaks, because it'd suck to be out there in the woods running it around or whatever and run low on oil and blow your engine. That's when you find out who your friends are, and that's when you find out who's going to be nice enough to tow your butt back because you got an oil leak. I found out that I need to go get me some more silicone after I'm done with this. The cap somehow got busted on this, so I had to cut the bottom of my silicone open in order to be able to use it. Alright, let that dry for just a little bit so it can become tacky while I clean the other cover. And by the way, if you guys want to use like a sanding block to clean this up, these dowel pins, they will pull right out. You just grab them with a pair of needle nose pliers and you can pull them out really easily. And my aim was off on that. Clean the brake clean off of this. And some more assembly lube on the shaft. Just rub it around. This also makes things go together a lot easier. Things usually just slide right into place like that. Drop our casing bolts back in. And get them started. And we'll go back over to our 10mm on our little cheap Hyper Tough impact. Bump it again. Man, I just love this thing. That thing works great. I like it. And now we need to clean this gasket surface up here so that we can put the head back on. But we're going to set this off to the side, and we're going to go ahead and shave the head down on this engine before we reinstall it.